Hello, this is Truth Be Told Transformation, and I'm Bonnie Burkert, here to share tools for transformation to live your highest truth. One thing that's true for me is that yoga should be understood beyond the mat. There's so much more to yoga than just that exercise. It's so important. But I'm here, I've invited a guest today to talk to us more about the philosophy of yoga, the origins of yoga, and the depth of yoga beyond just the physical practice. Welcome to the show, Dr. Douglas Brooks.
Thanks, Bonnie. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's great. Dr. Brooks, can we hear Dr. Brooks okay? I just want to double check with the team here in the studio. Speaking a little softly. You're talking to us from Rochester, New York. Is that correct?
Yeah, I live in the Finger Lakes of Western New York, so about 50 miles south of Rochester in this beautiful hinterlands. It's a lovely
It's
place.
great. I
I've
have
taught
been.
at the University of Rochester I'm entering my 40th year. Who has a job for 40 years? But I do. Mm.
It's great. And just so you know, our team here actually comes from Ithaca College. So they are neighbors of you up there as well. So, Dr. Brooks, I thank you for joining us because we are excited to talk to you about an upcoming workshop you'll be doing in Los Angeles. So, we welcome you soon to our fair city out here. And the event is called From Veda to Tantra. It's a four-part workshop that's going to be happening in I think it's in West Hollywood, at a studio called Ashala La or Ashala LA. And you want to tell us a little bit about what one can expect from this upcoming workshop? It's just an introduction to the work that you do.
Thanks for asking. I mean, I'm so looking forward to coming to Los Angeles. It's been some years, especially since COVID, when it all changed. Um, prior to the COVID experience, I'd been on the road 3 weekends a month for almost 20 years. So when we come to LA, I think that it's time in the path of contemporary yoga uh, to acknowledge all that modern postural yoga or contemporary yoga has really brought to the conversation. And I think the first important point to make is that yoga, as we're practicing it now on the mat, um, in studios, in the conversations that have happened at least since the the 70s and now over these decades, has been the most transformational innovation in the history of yoga, probably in the last 200 years, 300 years. Um, what I do see now that I think is important that's changing, and um, I think it's evident to all, is that yoga has mainstreamed into into the exercise community, into the wellness community, into the world in ways that I think none of us expected it ever would. When I began the study of yoga now almost 50 years ago, and went to India uh, as an 18-year-old in search of the truth, in search of myself, in search of the world, um, and found how yoga becomes a pivot, a centerpiece, a critical concept and term and conception of culture and tradition and practice in the Indian world, how how far we have come, I think is the very first point to say, and that the mainstreaming of yoga is in a very interesting way estranging yoga from its sources and origins and the earlier conversations. I mean, I think I've been here for for at least half the history of yoga in the West, if we mark that from the 19th century. So, and what I would say importantly is that yoga now has evolved and developed in ways that that have their own integrity, has its own autonomy. I think what people are doing with somatic yoga, with bodies, and in terms of wellness and the evolution of spirit, is all really pretty wonderful things. But I think also that mainstreaming and that way in which we find yoga in the gym, and fewer yoga studios, in fact, than ever, is has left us with an important conversation to have. and that would be about the past, about where these sources come from and where these practices originate and what were their aims and goals and what was their purpose. So what we want to do in LA, and I think this will be great, good fun, and a real contribution to folks who want to hear more about yoga, is begin from the beginning as far as we can. You know, I'm a historian of religion. I'm a scholar by profession, and I think that those approaches, the approach of the real historian and the linguist and the comparativist, as I was trained in those fields, are all germane to bringing these traditions to life, to making them valuable and practical in people's everyday lives. This isn't a scholastic or academic exercise as such, although those tools and the tools that we bring to the study of the subject are invaluable. And I think that we need some insight and some revision and some care when we talk about the history of yoga. And that's going to be kind of the first thing I want to bring to the LA seminars, to let people know that we can winnow the chaff. We can begin to consider the history and the resources and the conversations of yoga in the context of a long and storied body of complexity and tradition, in ways that give people a grounding, like a real sense of the facts. And if we trace yoga from origin through history, through different movements, through different uses and conceptualizations, and through the evolution of the term and the practices, that's going to be our long-term objective over the weekend in LA. We're going to start from the beginning as we can, and in each session map through the traditions and periods of evolution in the development of yoga in its origins in India, in its transmissions, how it has moved, how it evangelized and moved its way into other cultures through Buddhism, through Hindu teachings, through the Jains, through other sources in Indians' great religious and spiritual traditions. And then how it came to the West and its impact in the West. We'll cover that in the last bits of the seminar. So our first agenda, I think, is to give people a real sense of how the history of yoga informs these practices and teachings, and what were the goals, what were the aspirations, what did yogis want, and who were they, what did they think they were doing, why did they think they were doing it, and I think we can cull those resources for meaningful conversation, for answers to some of those questions, beginning in pre-Vedic times. And one of the things that I think we should do that's important is take a real look at history in a way that lets us give tradition its due, but also lets us sort out some of the facts as best we can. So let me suggest what I mean by this. Ancient India is, and the Indian worlds that gave us yoga, came from a conversation that projected a golden past and an antiquity that's of almost unimaginable duration, and gave us this idea of sages and rishis and yogis of antiquity that speak to the values and ideas, but don't necessarily represent the facts of history. And so one of the things we want to do is respect the way the story of yoga was told by those who created that story, and to honor their storytelling, their narratives, their concepts of history and practice, and to ask ourselves, again, what did they think they were doing, and why were they doing it? Where did they think they came from, and how do they think their traditions and practices evolved? At the same time, I think we can take the sober light of history and the study of language and other resources we have, and ask ourselves, well, when did this land? What are our sources? And what do they say? And so in our very first sessions, that's what we're going to do. We're going to land on the important textual and oral resources in the history of yoga. And I'm going to explain to you as best I can in what they say and what's going on. Like, what are the agendas? What are the key features? And how do these ideas get transmitted? How do they change? What's yoga? Because I think we can put yoga under a great umbrella, but it's a big crowd underneath there. There's a historical evolution and development and what yoga means and how the term is used and what different yogis understood the world to be, what they thought would happen because of their particular yoking, their engagement, their idea of connection, their union, with what and for what purpose. So we're going to trace that through sources, and that's why the seminar is called From Veda to Tantra, because while there are certainly all kinds of pointers and indications of what we call yoga in material as old as the Veda, it's really there in the Rig Veda and in those traditions that we get the first use of the term, particularly the first kind of documented sense of what it means. We get representation in archaeology and in language and in poetry and narrative. And we're going to take that most ancient material, probably from somewhere between 1800 and 1500, before the Christian era. So we're able to trace our yoga sources back the better part of 4,000 years and ask ourselves, what about these worlds can we understand? Let's give an honest and serious understanding of how we think yoga developed and what it meant, and then we'll have the audacity to ask ourselves, well, what about that is still meaningful, still important to us? What do we want to carry on? What more is there for us? What of those ideas and values and practices and insights of the ancients, what remains germane? What's anachronistic? What do we know now that we think changes the conversation or alters our understanding of the world or of ourselves or the universe? What kinds of contribution do we make? I think one of the more interesting features of the history of yoga is that every generation of yogis from near immemorial time has deliberately selected and culled and edited and refined and taken what they've wanted and leave the rest. They have winnowed the chaff, such as it is, and what some think is of utmost importance, others have dismissed. The conversations of yoga have been wide and varied and serious. They've been contentious. Yogis have the courage of their convictions and the valued experience of their practices. And who holds an opinion they don't think is right. So the conversation has been challenging, it has been cooperative, it has been collective, but every generation over the centuries has done its job in deciding what's important, what stays, what goes. And there have been radical and important innovations. By the time we come to the end of the LA seminar, we will reach the Tantra, which in a certain way represents the last great foray into experimentation and the elaboration of the yoga traditions that are dramatically different, in almost unrecognizably different in some certain ways from the oldest or from the preceding worlds and from the antiquity from which it emerged and evolved. So I want to follow that story of yoga, and I want to give people a sense that they belong to it, and so that they can do what yogis have done since time which is take what they think is valuable to them and 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 appreciate and understand the greater expanse of possibilities and teachings and ideas and the practices we call yoga, and then make it their own. Because yoga is always about applying and 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 experiencing for yourself um, what these what these practices and values can do and can do for you and can do for each other and for the world.
Yeah.
I think that's important. We're at an innovative tipping point in the history of yoga. Um, we're also at a place where we might well lose the thread to the past and to these sources and practices which are of immense value. I don't want to be an antiquarian. I don't want to just be a historian that says long ago and far away, this is what folks did. I want to be part of a conversation that takes seriously and respects the past and honors uh, our heritage as yogis and sees ourselves as part of a long, complex, disparate conversation, often collaborating, sometimes conflicting, always taking each other uh, with seriousness in a conversation of value. That means that we must not forget who we have been if we want to create something better of who we are.
Well, I mean, this is going to be epic. And, it's very interesting to think about because, as you say, I mean, watching how yoga has become, it's sad to hear you say, actually, that how we're losing yoga studios at the rate that we are. Right. And I mean, it's great that it's in
Yeah.
the gym, but we're sorry to see the studios, which maybe uphold certain, a different mood of community than maybe a gym would. And so I really love this deeper dive. And one of the things I thought would be interesting to ask you is, what do you think a person that maybe knows yoga more from the physical experience? How do you feel that some of this broader understanding that you're going to offer, and in this workshop and in general, in the work that you do, how might they benefit from that?
Hmm. That's a wonderful question. I think the blessing of modern yoga is that it has engaged the world um, in our bodies and somatically, and brought us a certain kind of attention to not just to kind of stretching or to postural movement or to breath, but in a more integrative sense of being embodied and being part and for wellness and for what more. And I think that um, the seminars that we're proposing are really asking what more does yoga offer and how to make a more integrative and comprehensive experience, because anyone who's even gone to the gym and had a positive experience on a yoga mat and participated in the community has come away from that experience, um, at least with the suggestion that there's so much more than meets the eye. And yet those experiences being positive or inviting are inviting to what? And what more is possible in a contemplative or reflective sense, in a cognitive and emotional sense? Um, how does yoga connect to us in a stressful world, not only physically and mentally and emotionally, but how does it invite us to reflect and to think more deeply about the connections that enrich our lives and the ones that don't? How do we sort out this world? And I think that yoga, if someone has yoga on their schedule for the day, they're already trying to sort out their world. They're making decisions about wellness, about the time, how they spend their time and their efforts in this world. And I think there's so much on our minds in this tumultuous and dangerous and precarious world we're in now. yoga has given us an enormous body of teaching about how to live with ourselves. And there's a definition of yoga in the Bhagavad Gita. There are two, I think, that come right to mind that kind of address the question you asked. At one point, it says yoga samayatvam, which in Sanskrit means yoga embraces the equanimous. That is, yoga brings us to a sense of connection and alignment, samayatvam. It brings things into an equanimity of consciousness. And that means a consideration. That's not a passive experience. That's not just a physical or somatic experience. It's one that takes us through the physical, into our minds, into our hearts, into our feelings, and looks for a place of perspective and engagement and recognition. And yoga wants to teach us more about that capacity we have that is unseen and yet unknown about ourselves. I think when you go through yoga class, I think everybody goes to a really good modern contemporary yoga class, walks away not only feeling physically engaged, but something is churned, something is turned around inside themselves. Because there's a second citation in the Gita that defines yoga. It says yoga kausalyam. So yoga creates a sense of the joy, the beneficence, the goodness of life. And how do we ground ourselves? How do we stand in yoga is the question that the resources, that the texts raise here. Because it's a comprehensive teaching. It's an inclusive teaching. Our bodies are gateways to our hearts, to our spirit. Our spirit's a gateway to the mind and to the contemplation and the seriousness of this mortal life. And I think yoga gives us an opportunity to integrate different parts of our lives. That's an important definition of yoga. Yoga is not only joining or it is yoking. It's pulling together and pulling together yourself. Holding the light together is one of the early definitions of yoga. And that light refers to the world itself, to the lucid mind, and to the light of one's own spirit, one's own mind. It's a comprehensive engagement. That's what I've always loved about yoga. It's body, it's mind, it's heart, it's spirit, it's emotion. It challenges us intellectually and purposefully. It invites us to real connection with nature, with culture, with the depths of our own conscience. And I think that those kinds of deeper connectivity, they're much like what happens on the mat, because they have to be practiced. They have to be learned. It isn't an indoctrination or a dogmatic project. It's one that takes seriously how we live as natural beings in the world, in the natural world, how we organize ourselves in culture and in society and in relationships, and then how we translate that personally into our own values, into our own practices. And we want to come away from that life, from those yoga classes, feeling that samayatvam, that deeper sense of belonging and inclusion and equanimity. And we want to feel that kausalyam. We want to feel that beneficence, that goodness. We want to feel something to celebrate about life, because the world is a storm. The world is complex.
That's a nice word.
Painful.
It's a good description. Oh yeah, and I love it. I mean, just the reverence with which you speak of yoga and its many facets. I just love that so much. It feels really good and true and authentic. And I'll throw the word presence in there as well, as far as our takeaways and the opportunity that the practice brings. Right, Dr. Brooks? I mean,
I think the practice is. I think that what the seminars in LA want to do is remind folks that there's so much more here. yoga in the gym is great. Like I'm all for it. Like yay,
Yeah.
like celebrate your body and have a good time, and make that connection
Breathe.
with your breath and with your physicality
Yeah.
and with your body and be inspired in good company. But yoga's a great conversation. And that's the invitation here. It's a conversation to history, to feelings, to ideas, to human beings who over centuries have asked the question, what does it mean to engage life,
Okay.
to engage society, to engage culture, to engage conscience, one's own person? And those resources are of inestimable value. And I think people may not even know that they're there. They may not even know um, what kind of resources and conversations there have been in storytelling, in philosophy, in reflection, in commentary on body, on mind, even on politics. Um, Yoga has never shirked from engaging human possibility. And I think we need a more integrative and serious effort that's also fun and also compelling and also interesting and can keep people um, engaged. We live such busy, tumultuous lives. Yoga class is just another thing on the list. Um, how do we draw a sense of deeper connection from everything, from all the things we do in life? And I think yoga is an enormous resource in that conversation. There's storytelling, there's poetry and mythology, there's philosophy and heart. And Lord knows we're going to need more of it just to get through
Very
what we.
much so. I'd like to, Dr. Brooks, I'd like to introduce everybody to your background. And you mentioned your time in India, for example. You're currently a professor of religion in Rochester, correct? At University of Rochester?
Yeah. So I left for India when I was 19 years old, um, and had to find some legitimate way to get there. Um, um, in, and, and and I left as a seeker. And part of that, part of that, for me at that point in my own life in the 1970s, and having kind of just missed the 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 storm of the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights era. Although I was a young teenager through all of it, I missed the war by but 2 years.
Crazy.
And that social upheaval, that cultural upheaval, the revolution, so much of the revolution of the 60s was really the late 60s and early 70s, as those of us who were there remember. And that sense of being a seeker um, drew me to other kinds of resources. I think on the one hand, I was a curious and eager seeker, um, but I was also careful. I had been and in a certain sense discontented, maybe discontented a little bit more than a little bit with with say the religions and spiritualities of my upbringing, which I'd found less than compelling or satisfying, and then drawn, rather romantically to India and to other alternative views, other possibilities. Um, and there were enough folks in front of me to kind of hold up the warning signs and offer me the invitations, you know. So so when I left for India, I left as a seeker, but I also and yet I also left with a certain kind of, how shall we say, a certain sober consideration of what's really being offered here. Um, I grew up in the swamps of Jersey, and and one of the things I learned in India is that the questions of yoga were not that far from the questions that I was asked as a kid in New Jersey. You talking to me? What do you want from me? Go. Something with that. That kind of like yoga brought some attitude to life, and but I went as a seeker, but I wanted something honest. I wanted something authentic. Um, all well and good. I'm glad that the Beatles met the Maharishi. I'm glad that Meher Baba had come in the generations before. I'm I I honor Annie Besant, the suffragette, and and who met Swami Vivekananda, and all of those voices in early yoga who brought yoga to the West and invited us into the conversation. But I left, um, that had only really just begun, and the seriousness of it hadn't yet uh, fully crystallized. That we didn't know very much, and in these last 40 and 50 years, um, scholarship and and a deeper connection and sensitivity to to the sources and to the people, and brought me into a remarkable relationship. So when I went to India, um, I went to deep South India, not really knowing much about the ancient Tamil people who lived in South India, but invited there by elders and scholars who said here you'll find something, you'll find these ancient ways and these practices and teachings, and you can study with folks for whom these are their family traditions, these are their own resources. Well, within 6 months of arrival, um, I was not only studying Sanskrit and Tamil language in university, um, but I had been invited to live in the home of the Sanskrit professor who became my teacher, my appa, my father, my surrogate family. And so I was invited to live in the family of Orthodox Brahmin folks in deep South India as a member of the family. And they came from deep and rich traditions. Some of it was problematic, and my teacher was a revolutionary. I think one of the reasons that he did invite me to move into his house with his wife and 3 children and his mother and his brother and sister-in-law and their 5 children, 11 people in 4 rooms. I think part of what he was also doing was inviting a revolution, inviting this foreigner into their world, um, because he wanted to represent something more than what he himself had also experienced in India as the oppression of caste, as sexism and the misogynies of these traditions, as all the sort of negative things. I think he was about wanting to change that world, and inviting this teenager to live with them. What began as just a 9-month invitation ended up being 2 years, and then 2 years into an evolution. Over 16 years, I lived with my family in India, for almost 6 or 7 of those years. And we studied, and during that time, I would go. I would get long time in India. I'd get long stints in India because I would go home. I would be invited back into the house. And my teacher was an amazing and erudite and scholar, and a keeper of the great traditions of yoga. His family found its centerpiece in the great temple of the dancing Shiva. You're probably familiar with the Nataraja figure, the figure of the Lord of Dance.
Of course.
There's one great temple in South India that is his principal home, the beginning of that story, and those traditions of practice and of storytelling and of ritual that come through the great temple at Chidambaram, the temple of Nataraja. Those were my family's traditions, and I was invited to participate in those. And so I was really just extraordinarily lucky. I came as a seeker, and I was invited to live with a family, and to participate in all of their lives, um, and to study with a really gifted and talented and wonderfully erudite and illumined scholar. My teacher was an amazing, lovely soul, and a genuinely talented scholar who the depth of his erudition I can't understate, because as I was studying with him, I asked him, can I stay here? Can I live with you? Can I study? And he said, you can come anytime, and you can stay as long as you like. And you are our family. but you should go back to the States and you should study in university there. And it was because of my Indian teacher that I ended up at Harvard to study Sanskrit. And in fact, he mentioned the very name of the professor of Sanskrit at Harvard that he sent me, particularly to study with. And that began a conversation both with academics and with scholarship that it wasn't really ever separate from the spiritual task. It was never really those weren't really different or competing worlds. Those were complementary conversations. Sure, academia uh, can 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 be desiccating, um, but that wasn't my experience because I was always had one. I was always looking to go back to India, and over that 16-year period before my teacher passed in 1994. Um, I spent 6 years in that conversation and in graduate school working um, both in the historical, critical worlds of academic scholarship, studying South Asia, studying India, studying in the comparative study of religion. That's my degrees are in the comparative study of religion. Um, I have and in languages, and that connection to being part of a family and included in a culture was has been the story has sustained me and been the story of my life. Um, when my teacher passed in '94, it was I was just ascending, as it were, to tenure and to full professorship in the university. My plan was to bring him here so that he might retire and we could spend the rest of our lives together. He became ill and passed in a few months. Um, but it's but the depth and the connection to my family in India and to the traditions of the temple where I've been I've been there, for this
Yeah.
is 48
And
years.
it's so incredible. I mean, and this is a beautiful example of the depth of your study and practice that you certainly bring to all of us. I mean, a holistic approach. Again, we're talking about the origins of yoga. You're letting us know your origin story here with your practice, and it's really
Yeah, like
it's.
how did a kid from New Jersey end up in India?
I mean, it
Living
was
in
a long time
living
ago.
in the
On top
Grumman
of it,
home.
there was no Expedia.com to book your flight. I
No,
mean,
no. So
seriously, it's
I think one of the reasons that it became so immersive is there were no other choices.
right.
Like the sun rose at 6. We may have had 3 or 4 hours of electricity in the house and running water,
Right.
and we were in a major city. But this was the 1970s and 80s. India was very much in a developing way, and of course there was no internet. It was 11 days out and 11 days back to send a letter home. Um, we spoke Tamil in the house. We studied Sanskrit all day.
Yeah.
Um, and so that immersive experience was 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 entire. It was my whole life. So it made coming back here the hard part.
Yeah, I
It
bet.
made it was I would I would spend 5 or 6 months, from May till the middle of September. During graduate years, I'd come back like just at the edge of that, like just in time to make classes again, and then and then and then suddenly sort of like, you know, I'm in like I'm in the library in a tweed jacket going to Sanskrit class, in an ancient university, um, with the sword of Damocles over my head because the traditions of academia were so merciless and so rigorous and so insanely difficult. Um, and yet it was just all part of a piece. you know um, I'd come back and do my work here in university and then bolt for India as soon as I can. And then luckily, um, in in the in the middle '80s, I won a series of of opportunities, of grants, that gave me long stints of time in India, 2 3 years at a time. And it's in that immersive experience of language and culture and spirituality in the hands of a man who had such a visionary, such a radical sense of bringing value Um, when we were there, we began a school that is now a matriculation school from lower kindergarten through high school. And the principle of our school, like the principal organizing values of the school, is that we were there especially to bring girls into the process of their own education. Um, that was in an era where that wasn't a guarantee. That wasn't boys went to school. Did all the girls go to school? And we're there in South India. There are Christians, there are Muslims, there are Hindus. We brought them all together in this school. And the principle of the school was our organizing principle was to bring all the religions, boys and girls, and then their native language, Tamil, their national language, Hindi, the international language, English, and Sanskrit. And so we taught 4 languages in this school. And that school still stands today, now some 50 years after its founding. And it was built on these ideals of inclusion and of bridging culture and of bringing yoga uh, as the meaningful connection to life, to success, to a spiritual sense of value into the world. And I'm really proud to say we have kids who went to this little school in South India. Began as an empty field with a shack and slate and chalkboards. And we have students now who teach in international universities, who are graduates of our school. And this was all just part of how to bring what yoga is about to the world. How do we do that? Well, we make it something that brings quality and value and connection among people. And
Exactly.
we're still invested in that.
And it could
Um,
be something for everybody. It doesn't matter if you can't, do the perfect down dog or something like
right,
that,
right.
right?
I
I
mean,
mean,
the physical practices were always just a part of the story.
that's what we really need to make people understand. And that's where we want to invite any of our listeners that happen to be in the LA area to come and see this, participate in this amazing seminar that you're planning for us the first weekend of April, Dr. Brooks, correct?
Yes, yes, I'll be
Again,
there the weekend of April 4th. It's gonna be great, good fun.
yeah,
We'll have
truly.
poetry, storytelling. We've got myths and and all kinds of ways of just illuminating the history of yoga and making these ancient practices something relevant and meaningful to our lives now. Like that's what's got to matter. This can't just be long ago and far away. But we also can't abandon that past. It's a treasure trove
Yeah.
of teachings and of ideas and of practices. And we risk losing them unless we decide to learn them. And that's part of what I want to contribute to in the seminar. It's just to bring just a little more of what yoga is about and can be about for people. I think I'm so happy when people have found the mat, or they've found community in a yoga studio, or they've realized that having a spiritual life is having an everyday life. Um, I so much want to invite folks to that larger conversation because I was lucky enough to live it and lucky enough to learn it in ways that I think um, can bring these resources and these conversations.
Incredible story for sure. And thank you for sharing it with us here on Truth Be Told Transformation. Again, hearing about your transformation and hearing about how the tools of yoga in its many forms can help facilitate that transformation. So thank you. Now we want to let people know how to find out about this event. You can go to Bright Star and search for Dr. Douglas Brooks. The name of the event is From Veda to Tantra. Again, it's in West Hollywood at Ashala in April 4th through 6th. And Dr. Brooks, your website, is it Raja? Thank
Rajanica.com.
you.
But I would warmly welcome typing the word Rajanica into Substack. I think Substack as
Okay.
a connective conversational website, as a platform, has reached a far brighter, bigger audience. So Rajanica Substack is where I would really direct folks to go.
Fantastic.
There's dozens of free audio teachings. There's essays and learning about yoga. we cover yoga in every possible way, from history and text and resource into esoteric teachings and back into politics and back into life and back into living.
I'll definitely take a look. And just so everybody knows, Rajanika is spelled Rajanaka. Rajanika. Thank you. I
Yes.
didn't know how to pronounce it. I was going to ask you that before we got on,
Oh,
before we
thanks. No,
started
yes,
to
yes,
roll.
yes. It,
So one of my
it's
takeaways.
the word Raja is
Raja.
the word royal in English, right? Le
Ah,
roi.
yes.
Raja is the king, but Rajanika means the modest prince or the modest princess. It means, and it suggests that we have power in the world, but we aren't dominant. We aren't rajas. We aren't sovereigns of tyranny. We are Rajanika. We are those who seek to an autonomy and a gracious connection of power, empowered value, but with humility and with a sense of of genuine deference and inclusion of other people's views and values. So Rajanika is the term.
Rajanika.
This is another term. At the seminar, I'll explain
That might
some.
be exactly. You have to come to the seminar to learn more, or that
Yeah.
could be a whole other episode.
Well,
So that sounds great, and thank you again. Namaste, and so much to unfold here. I look forward to re-listening to our conversation because there's much to learn, and
thanks, Bonnie.
I
Thanks
hope
for
to see
having
you
me.
when you're in
Just let me
LA.
talk. It was so sweet of you just to let me.
Thank you again. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks.
So
Thanks for
we
having me.
so we appreciate
In
you
LA.
listening. Bye. We'll see you then.
Yeah, you bet.
Truth Be
Take
Told
care.
Transformation, everybody. And I'm Bonnie Burkert. And don't forget that Tony Sweet has a live show every Friday, 3 p.m. Pacific, on our YouTube channel. And Robert Hensley has new episodes every week as well. We are here to open the conversation to higher consciousness, to help that it helps everybody find a better path in their life. We send you our very best, and thanks for sharing what we do. Until the next time, I bid you to shine on.